1 Kings chapter 12. I don't know, Kevin, you may be doing other things, but if you can get that on the screen, that's okay. If you can't, I didn't ask, so I'm not going to hold it against you. But 1 Kings chapter 12 is where we're going to start this morning. And we're going to be talking about the divided kingdom, or how the kingdom of Israel becomes divided. But I want somebody to look up for me Proverbs 11:14. Can somebody look up Proverbs 11:14 for me? Who would do that? Who has one of these things called a Bible and would do that? Brad, you got it? Hey, you got a microphone back there. Does that work? Can you speak into that when you do it? Like real, I don't know if that thing, does that thing even work, Adam? It does? So y'all could talk to me while I'm preaching. Y'all can back talk while I'm up here preaching. Is that what that is? All right. Well, we'll get to that in just a second. Now, let me just tell you, we're in 1 Kings chapter 12, and we're going to be talking about how the kingdom of Israel was divided, but that's not really the point of it all today. But as we think about it, can anybody name for me, who was the first king of Israel? First king of Israel was Bob. No, who was it? Who was the first king of Israel? Saul. And because he was a tall, good-looking guy like me, and so God said, how did that guy work? And so then who was the second king? What happened to Saul, by the way? What happened to Saul? Okay, but he was rejected because of what? Disobedience. Okay, and so who became the second king of Israel? His name was what? David. And David is the pinnacle, man. David is the founder of the city of David, Jerusalem, and all that. And he led a wonderful kingdom that was united. And then his son was named what? What was that? Solomon. Solomon's the guy who wrote Ecclesiastes, wrote Proverbs, and did wonderful things, became wealthy. I told you last week the guy was making like $1 million a day in today's money. His wealth was unsurpassed. He managed all the trade routes of the Middle East. He had a united kingdom. He grew in international acclaim. Solomon was amazing, but Solomon had all those wives that led his heart in the wrong direction. And he's responsible for what he did. It's not, don't blame them. I mean, he entered into these treaties, accumulated wives, concubines. They led him in the wrong direction. And so Solomon is going to pass away, just like we all are. And after Solomon passes away, the kingdom is going to be in a world of hurt because of his disobedience and because of his worshiping false gods. And his son is going to be in line for the throne, at least in his view. And his name is Rehoboam. Boy, that's a name, isn't it? Rehoboam. Does anybody know anybody today named Rehoboam? I mean, my goodness, we don't call people Rehoboam anymore. And ultimately, the kingdom is going to be divided north and south. And to make it simple, God says, all right, we'll just put Jeroboam in the north. So you got Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And that's the two guys that are going to be in our story today. But really, the story is not just about a divided kingdom. What the story really is about, the story is about people who are unwilling to follow wise counsel. If somebody would read for me, who has Proverbs? Brad, you've got it with the little mic back there. Proverbs 11, verse 14, I believe it is. What version are you reading out of today? Can you tell us? The Holy Bible version? It's okay, it doesn't matter. Go ahead and read it. Okay, that's fine. Read Proverbs 11, verse 14. I like having you back there with a mic. That's pretty cool. Go ahead. Read it one more time. This is the Living Bible. Y'all listen to this.
Without wise leadership, a nation is in trouble, but with good counselors there is safety.
Without wise leadership, a nation is in trouble, but with good counselors there is safety. Now, let's talk about for a second that passage, because in many translations, I have a New King James Version I'm using, and some of you have other NIVs or whatever you might, or King James or whatever. But the traditional way of translating that is to say that in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. That if you've got a major decision to make, you don't need to go out there as the Lone Ranger trying to figure that thing out on your own. It is good to hear from other people and talk to other people and get wise counsel. And in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Now, we see this, for example, in our government. They need good counselors, by the way. But our government is actually set up where the president, has a national security council, and he's an economic council, and he has all these councils. And you hope there's good people there. You hope there's, wise people there. Sometimes you wonder, but you hope that that's true, because the president, nobody knows everything. Nobody's able to know how to handle the Ukraine crisis, and how to handle the supply chain crisis, and how to handle the inflation crisis, and how to handle all these things that are coming down the pipe. Nobody knows how to do that. So hopefully there's counselors there. That's the way the government is set up. If you think about George Washington, who was the father of our country, he had counselors who helped him. He had General Nathaniel Greene, General Henry Knox. He had Rochambeau, the Frenchman. He had Marquis de Lafayette, who helped him. And so we actually still applaud those people because of their role in founding our country. I remember during World War I, we entered World War I very late. And when our doughboys landed in France, the chant from our doughboys was, "Lafayette, we are here. Lafayette, we are here." In other words, he fought for our country and was part of our revolution. Now we're here to help France. We're here to, and that was something that they remembered all those years later. But in the multitude of counselors, there are safety. How many times when you make a decision, do you want to go off and you want to do it all by yourself? Don't tell me what to do. I'll do what I want to do. If I need your opinion, I'll ask for it. You ever heard anybody say those kinds of things? Have you ever said those kinds of things? Maybe is a question that I should ask you today. Well, if you approach life with that attitude, you're not always going to make the best judgments, because none of us knows everything. Nobody knows it all. Now, I do know some know-it-alls. You ever met a know-it-all? Don't look at me like I'm one now. I don't want to see that. God will get y'all for doing that. But you've known some know-it-alls, and we've all known a few know-it-alls. But know-it-alls usually make very bad choices. How many of you remember what happened 126 years ago yesterday? You may remember what happened 126 years ago yesterday. June 25th, 1876, I think. You ever heard of General Custer? Y'all remember General George Armstrong Custer and the Battle of the Little Bighorn? When he had 210 soldiers and was told by his superiors, do not attack the Sioux, Lakota, and Cheyenne Confederation. Don't do that until you get reinforcements. Don't do that until you're allowed to. And Custer says, "Oh no, I know what to do. I know the terrain. I know those Indians, can't fight. I know they don't know their tactics. I know that they're not going to stand in the face of these federal troops." And so here goes General Custer, arrogant, prideful, leading 210 men to their slaughter because he was unwilling to follow counsel. You need to remember that in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And if you are unwilling to listen to somebody, you're going to make some big mistakes. Let me give you an example. You're sitting in a nice building today. I like this building. It's a nice building. It's pretty. It's nice. It's unique for buildings in church life. It's got a lot of good things about it. This is not what I had in mind. Not in the least. Because I had, in all of my wisdom, all these other ideas, and I drew them up on a paper sack. I drew them up on a piece of notebook paper or whatever. And it was going to be in a different location, and it was going to have a different look, and it was going to have, it was all this stuff. And then we met with people who actually knew what they were doing. And they said, well, if you follow your idea, you don't have anywhere to park. And people are going to have to walk a mile just to get into the thing. If you do it your way, it's going to not be expandable. It's not going to, there's all kind of things. And if you do it your way, you're going to have seating issues. And so I began to listen to people, and they made sense. And they said, you know what? Nobody goes to a church because it's sitting out on the side of a road. And I thought, you know what? You're exactly right. Nobody goes to church because it's sitting out on the side of the road. I was in New York City, and there were churches on street corners that were great locations, and millions of people going by every day, and they were empty. They were nail parlors and massage parlors, and they weren't even churches anymore. Nobody goes to a church because it's sitting in the right spot. They go because God is at work in that place. They go because the people, that's why they go. And so I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then they said, you might ought to think about putting that baptistry out there. And I said, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard in my life. No, I've never seen one like that. No. And they said, if you do that, then people can get really close when they have somebody who they love who's baptized. They can celebrate with them. Not only that, it can be a water feature the whole time. And then you don't have to go up here, and you don't have to build a second floor that's going to cost you like $300,000 to put all this stuff in, steel and all this stuff, and plumbing and electrical, and you do all this stuff. And all, by the way, if somebody's way up there, you can barely see them anyway. But if you're there, I thought, that kind of makes sense. And so we decided to go that route. And we began to listen to people. Because in the multitude of counselors, there is wisdom. In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. Nobody knows everything about everything. And so when you're making decisions, have a little humility in the way that you make the decision. Because I am trying not to be one of those people who is never in doubt, but often in error. You know people like that? I know people who are often in error, but they're never in doubt. Oh, they know, but they're always wrong. Look in 1 Kings chapter 12 and notice our text this morning. Now Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. Rehoboam is the son of Solomon, and he is going to Shechem. That is the place of inauguration. That is the place of coronation back in those days. It was a place where he would go in the tradition of Israel to be made king. And so it happened when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard it, and he was still in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon and had been dwelling in Egypt, that they sent and called him. And then Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. Stop right there. You say, why did they call for Jeroboam? Well, Jeroboam had been told by a prophet that he would be a leader in Israel. And when Solomon heard that, he wanted to kill him. So Jeroboam had left the country. Jeroboam had been living down in Egypt. And then when Solomon dies and Rehoboam is going to be inaugurated as king, Jeroboam comes back. And when he comes back, he doesn't come back with an army, and he doesn't come back with pride and arrogance. He really doesn't. But he comes back and says, we need to have a talk with Jeroboam before he becomes king. We need to have a discussion with him. And here's what the discussion is. Look in verse 4. The discussion is, Rehoboam, your dad, that is Solomon, made our yoke very heavy. And now what we want you to do is to lighten the burdensome service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we'll serve you. Now, what had Solomon done? Solomon had built one of the 7 wonders of the world, the temple in Jerusalem. He had had people cutting cedar trees in Sidon. He had people quarrying rocks and great granite rocks to build this thing. In fact, you can go to Israel even today, and there's still these huge rocks that are there that have been there forever, these foundation stones and all this kind of stuff. And he had them do all this, and it had taken years and millions of dollars. But guys, if you're going to do all that, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Is there a free lunch in the world? Somebody got to pay for it. And who had to pay for it and who had to do the work was the people of the nation. They were being taxed. They were being stressed. They were being worked hard. And so they come to Rehoboam and they say, look, man, your father worked us hard. Now, what we would like is a period of rest, a period of peace. Let's back off this thing just a little bit, and we'll serve you if you'll just do this. Now, look, you can't run any business, any government, or any church at 150 miles an hour all the time. If you push your people and push your people and push your people and push your people, there's going to come a breaking point in there somewhere. Have you ever worked in a place like that? Where they wanted just to drive you? I mean, my first job in a factory, I can remember the line would go down. We were making lights. We were making the big lights that are out here. We were in a factory doing that. And the line would go down. Parts were missing. Machine wasn't working. And we had a supervisor who would, first thing he would do is he would go and turn the line back on. And then he'd go say, what's the problem? He didn't care that you're going to pile product up for 100 miles. You're going to ruin everything. His whole thing was push, push, push. And I understand that's what companies do. That's how they make their money. I get that. But if you do that over time, people are going to say, I've had enough of that. That doesn't work well. You can't do that to folks and take advantage of them. Well, the people were simply saying, Rehoboam, you're a new guy. This is a new administration. We can do things differently. And if you'll do them differently, we will follow you. But I want you to notice what he does. Verse 5, he says, well, depart from me for 3 days, and then come back to me. And the people departed. He actually at first does something smart. He says, give me some time to think about it. Because I have noticed that when I make snap decisions, are they wise? Probably not. When I make snap decisions, a lot of times they're the wrong decision. When I do something rash, sometimes I need to say, give me a little time, and then we'll talk about this. Rehoboam does that. Give us 3 days. Now notice what he does. Verse 6, he consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived. And he said, how do you advise me to answer these people? Now I want you to think about this. These elders who had worked for his dad had years of experience in leadership. They had experience in building projects. They had experience in economics. They had experience in governmental organization. They had experience in all kinds of stuff. These are people who know. These are intelligent, smart people. They had been around Solomon, who was the wisest guy, right? And so they had learned themselves. These were people you would want to get the answers from. When you seek out good counsel, you need to make sure that the counsel you're getting is experienced, wise counsel. And so he goes to people who have that experience, which is a smart thing to do. Now, if you find the wrong counsel, that's a problem too. We'll get to that here in just a second. But he goes to these who are elders, who are experienced men. I read years ago, this statement, and y'all might, where somebody said this. They said, when a man with money meets a man with experience, the man with the experience ends up with the money. And the man with the money ends up with the experience. Y'all think about that. If you go out and you meet somebody who's kind of got a little experience, they may know a little more than you know. Well, here he goes to the elders and he says, how do you think I should advise the people? Now, these guys have been worked hard too. They have been through a lot with Solomon as well. Notice what they say, verse 7. They said, if you will be a servant to these people today and serve them and answer them and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. If you'll just listen to them, if you will serve them, they will be your servant forever. Now let's just stop here for a second. What is the role of a governmental official? We've got governors, we've got presidents, we've got representatives, we've got mayors. What is their role? What are they supposed to do? What is their job? What's that?
Advocate for your constituents.
Okay, advocate for their constituents. What else is their job? What is their responsibility? They are to serve the people. They are to advocate for the people. They are to look out for the needs of the people. If they don't do that, they don't have any right to be in office. They are a servant. Now, Rehoboam didn't fully appreciate that, but God has always declared that those who are in authority, in whatever position it is, those who are in authority are not the ultimate authority. God is the ultimate authority. Those who are in those positions are servants to serve the people and to do justice and to act with mercy and to do right things. Now, do we get that out of our politicians a lot of times? Probably not. I mean, we have seen this week, I don't want to get political here, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Did you ever think you would see that in your lifetime? Really? Did you ever really think you would see that? I didn't think we would. I'm for life. I believe that God is the God of life. I believe that there's sanctity of human life. I believe all this, but I don't know that I ever really thought it would happen. And the reason I didn't think it would happen, to be honest with you, is because politicians, doing what politicians do, are a whole lot more interested in having an issue that they could use to stir up Christian people and get them to vote a certain way than they are fixing the problem. They're much more interested in their power than they are principle. That's sad, but that's the truth. And so all these years, people would say, well, I'm for life, I'm for life, I'm for life. But in reality, you'd say, well, okay, what are you doing? What are you really doing? And nothing really changed. Well, now, it's really about to get serious, y'all. Because now that Roe v. Wade is no longer accepted law, or it's been overturned, then every politician in every state, in every place is going to have to make decisions. And you're going to see what people are really made of now. Because people say abortion's outlawed. No, it isn't. You can go to New York, and it's the abortion capital of the world, man. You can go to Illinois, it's the abortion. It's the second abortion capital. You can go to California. I mean, it's not. What you're going to see now is what people are really made out of or not. So we need to be praying now that the right decisions will be made, okay, to support. You see what I'm getting at? Now, I want you to think about this. Look at verse 7. If you will be a servant, serving the people, advocating for them, serving them, and answer them and speak good words to them, they'll be there forever. Listen, we have a problem. And it is this, and we got a lot of problems, but here's one of them. People want to have power, but they don't want to serve. And it happens in church all the time. Several years ago, and I'm going to just tell you this because you need to know. Several years ago, pastors began to twist a couple of verses, and it's real easy to twist a couple of verses around, right? It's real easy to do that. Pastors began to twist a couple of verses around, and they began to say, excuse me, we're the power here. We're the boss. We are the ruler. And if you're going to be right with God, you better do what I say. I'm the boss. And pastors became the ruler. They began to see themselves as ruler. In fact, I saw a quote from a pastor this week who told people in his church, you either follow leadership or you just get out. You get. My heart broke when I saw that. The job of a pastor is to be a servant and to be a follower of Jesus Christ who came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And when we begin to see ourselves as people of power instead of people who take a towel and a basin and wash other people's feet and serve, then we got problems. Now I tell you that because honestly, that perspective of pastors being the ruler and not the servant is being taught in seminaries today. It's being promulgated, and it's happening everywhere. And one of these days, whether it's not going to be today or tomorrow, and I'm not looking to retire anytime soon. But hey, one of these days, I ain't going to be here. That's just the way life is, right? It might be 15 years, 20 years, 2 years, 100 years, whatever. But when that day comes, you need to be very careful that you find somebody who is a servant. And when we look for staff, we don't want somebody to be the boss over everything. We want somebody who will serve the people. And if we don't have that, then we've made a huge mistake. Do y'all got any comments about that? I need to stop here. Does anybody want to say anything about that before I move on any further along? About being a servant or what it means to be a servant?
I think there's a difference in seeking wise counsel or looking for somebody that's going to tell you what you want to hear.
Oh, you're exactly right. We're going to get to that in a second, but there's a big difference in seeking wise counsel and having a confirmation bias where they just want to tell you what you want to hear. All right, what else? Anybody have anything you'd like to share? Any questions or anything I've said? All right, let's look at verse 8. Let me show you, and we'll get to what Glenda mentioned here in just a moment. Y'all look at verse 8. Verse 8 says that he what? What did he do? Yeah, he rejected the advice which the elders had given him. And he decided to consult the young men who had grown up with him. He went out and said, oh, guys, I grew up with you boys, so y'all help me out a little bit. And so the truth of the matter is that Rehoboam already had in mind what he wanted to do. He already knew what he wanted to do. I'm going to put it in stark terms, and we're online here, so I don't want this going all over the world, but I guess it will. He wanted to sit on his backside and have everybody come serve him. And he wanted to live the life of luxury, like the Beverly Hillbillies or something, and have everybody serve him. He didn't want to be a servant of the people. And he rejected that advice by going to his buddies, his compadres, those who were younger. Now, there's nothing wrong with young. We've got to listen to young adults. Young adults have a lot to offer. They have a different perspective than we do. And if we don't have young adults, guys, we don't have a future. And so we need to listen to young adults. We need to pay attention to young adults. We need to minister to young adults. But also, there is this thing of older people teaching younger people, and that there's this connection that needs to be there. That's why we believe here at Sand Ridge in what is called an intergenerational church. We could have made the decision, and a lot of churches have made the decision, that we're going to target one group of people. We're going to target just these kids. We're going to target just this young adults. We're going to target just senior adults. Churches do that all the time. It is a mistake. The wise course, the biblical course, is to have an intergenerational church where you have older and you have younger, and you have that energy and vitality and fresh ideas coming from younger people, and then you have some wisdom and experience coming from older people. And look, I can't tell you how thankful I am that 25 years ago today, I became pastor of this church. And when I became pastor of this church, we had men who were significantly older than I. We had Earl Anderson, and we had Gene Cannon, and we had Harold Tolley, and we had Benny Gillum, and we had Hugh Fessmeyer, and we had all these great guys. And I would want to go do something, because, come on, man, let's get with it, man, let's go do this. And they would say, well, now, preacher, you need to know this, and you probably don't understand this. And they would help me. And I was so thankful that they did, because that counsel was wise, and that counsel kept us right on the track that he wanted this church to be on. And guys and ladies, that's what we need to continue to have in the life of this church. We need to have that kind of wisdom and that kind of counsel, and we need to have people who are willing to listen to that. Okay? And so I kind of pull them along, and they kind of pull me along, and then it all kind of worked, because nobody got in the ditch on either side. That's what needs to happen. Now, how many of you, and let me just ask this question before I get any further in left field here, but how many of you, have ever received some advice that you wish you had paid attention to, but you didn't? Ooh, I see one hand. Surely there's more of that. Come on now. Have you ever received any advice that you wished you had paid attention to, but you didn't? Anybody want to tell us their story? You probably going, no, I'm not going to tell anybody. Have you ever? Y'all remember the guy who invented Coca-Cola? What was his name? Y'all remember? Anybody remember the guy who invented Coca-Cola? Some of you are of that age. You might remember back in the 1800s when that happened. But his name was Pemberton, and he was a pharmacist. But when he died, his family sold the recipe for Coca-Cola for beans, man, for nothing, to a guy by the name of Asa Candler. And if you go to Atlanta today, Candler is all over Atlanta. Candler School of Theology at Emory University, Candler Hospital, Candler this, because that guy took Coke and made it what it is. But the guy who invented it, they got supper, you know. How many of you remember the name of Ray Kroc, who is the guy who made McDonald's what it is? McDonald's with all these franchises and people and 10 billion served and all that kind of stuff. But you probably don't remember that McDonald's is named after the McDonald brothers in California who started flipping burgers, you know. And then Ray Kroc comes along and offers them what they think is a great deal. And, you know, they think it's something. Listen, they got beans, man. Bad advice. Bad advice. All of us have had times when we've been given advice and we didn't take it. We need to be like Forrest Gump, who listened to Lieutenant Dan. And Lieutenant Dan put my money into a fruit company. And now I don't have to work no more. He put it into Apple. And so he put it into a fruit company, and now I don't have to work no more. And, you know, and Lieutenant Dan said, we don't have to worry about money. And Forrest Gump said, that's good, one less thing, right? Because he listened to good advice. We need to be the kind of people who listen to that kind of advice. But we've all done things in the past that we wish that we wish we would have heeded. We wish that we would have, that we would have listened to, but we didn't. Now, Rehoboam is a guy who, the kingdom is ultimately divided. Let's finish our lesson. Look at verse 9. He rejected the advice. Verse 9, he says to them, what advice do you give? How should we answer? The people who have spoken to me, and he said, lighten the yoke which your father has put on us. Look at verse 10. The young man whom he had grown up with spoke to him and said, this is how you ought to speak. Tell them your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. You say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. You tell them we're not going to lighten the load, we're going to make it worse. If you think my father had a little finger that thick, my little finger is going to be thicker than his waist. I mean, if you just compare it comparatively, it's going to be a lot worse now than it was back then. Look at verse 11. And whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I'll add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I'll chastise you with scourges. And scourges are a whip that have metal studs in them to, barbs, if you will, to beat people with. He says, if you think it was bad, it's really going to get bad. And Jeroboam, verse 12, and all the people... So Jeroboam and all the people came on the third day as the king had directed, saying, come back on the third day. Verse 13, the king answered this people roughly and rejected the advice the elders had given him. And he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy. I'll add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips. I'll chastise you with scourges. And the king did not listen to wise counsel. For the turn of events was from the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which was spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And do you know what the people all said? People said, if you're going to act that way, we have nothing to do with David. We have nothing to do with you anymore. And the story ends like this. It doesn't end, but it continues like this. Israel became 10 tribes in the northern kingdom. Rehoboam led 2 little dinky tribes, Judah and Benjamin, in the southern kingdom. And those tribes of Israel never have been united ever again. And when you see Israel on TV today, it has nothing to do with those tribes. Because the 10 tribes of the north got assimilated into Syria and they became just gone. Just gone. And Israel was ripped apart. and their lives were never the same. If you make bad choices by not listening to good advice, it can have long-term consequences in your life. That's why we need to pray, and we're going to pray and dismiss. That's why we need to pray for our teenagers and our young adults and our families, because one choice, listening to foolish advice, can change your life forever. Rehoboam could have been the ruler of the greatest economy and kingdom in the ancient Near East. And what did he become? Who names their kids Rehoboam? Who celebrates Rehoboam Day? Who goes to Israel and says, "Show me the palace of Rehoboam"? In the multitude of counselors, there's safety. Father, thank you for this group who's assembled this morning to learn of the Word of God. Make us people who are listening to wise counsel as we serve the Lord Jesus, as we lead this church, and as we make decisions. Bring us to a place of submission to you as the only authority, realizing that you've called us to be servants and to serve your people. And we pray this in the name of Christ. Amen. God bless you guys. Y'all are ready now to go to the restroom.